Hey folks, in this video I'll be recapping my most recent tournament, the 2024 St. Louis Masters, which was a very strong open tournament held just here in my backyard in St. Louis. So yeah, super strong field. I ended up playing all 9 rounds and I started as the 52nd seed, I believe, out of 60 total players. So it's kind of a small, tight-knit group, but very packed, especially at the top. Lots and lots of strong grandmasters, and yeah, only a handful of non-GMs in the whole event. So super cool tournament. It was very tough. Definitely up and down for me in terms of my performance. But I had some good games and definitely some not so great games, but I'll be going over them in this video and hopefully give you guys some insights into how the tournament went for me and how the games went and yeah, all that stuff. Overall, I ended up having a pretty decent performance. I finished with 4 out of 9 points. So -1, but I played up every single game. Not always way up, but every single one of my opponents was higher rated than me, so I ended up gaining a couple of FIDE rating points from the event. So it ended up being a pretty decent performance, and I think after this tournament and going into 2025, my rating will be somewhere around 2351. So back over 2350, the road to 2400 continues. And yeah, at the end of the video, I'll probably give some thoughts on my chess going into the next year as well. So going into the games, we'll start with round 1, where I was paired against Grandmaster Robby Kevlishvili, who is originally coming from Netherlands, but is a St. Louis local and someone I've played a couple times. So this tournament is a 9-round event. Like I mentioned, time control 90 plus 30. So classical chess, 2 rounds per day, and no second time control. So at least, it's kind of a shorter classical, which is important if you're going to be playing 2 rounds per day. So this first game starts off with the Sicilian, and Robby and I have played a couple times with him as white, and it's always some kind of Sicilian. In this game, he chooses knight c3 here, knight f6, and bishop b5, so transposing into the Rossolimo. So I play queen c7 here, and this is a line that I've actually played a number of times in classical tournaments, blitz and rapid. So the idea is for black to just develop. I'm going to play e5 if allowed. White castles, knight d4, rook to e1. This is all theory. And okay, for the purposes of this recap, I'm not going to go into every single detail in all these games, rather just give a general overview of what happened. So this opening, I think, was okay for me at the start. E5, bishop c4, d6, h3. But I do run into a difficult position basically right out of the opening. So bishop e6 here, a4. At this point, I'm pretty much kind of thinking on my own and trying to figure out what to do. And I feel like there is some strategic danger in the position for black because white wants to trade on f6 and establish this knight on d5. This is like a very typical approach where white controls the d5 square. Eventually will play c3 and tries to use that to their advantage. So I played b6 here, just kind of anticipating some play on the queen side, like rook b8, a6, b5 eventually. I don't think this was the right move. I think better is something like queen to d7. Anticipating the knight coming to d5. So for example, if white takes, knight d5, I can trade on f3, go bishop g5, for example. And I think black is reasonably okay here. With a typical plan like king h8, g6, f5. I can also play something like knight d5, bishop d8, not trade on f3. And just park the bishop here, where it's really not that bad. One day maybe can come out to the queen side, but long story short, I think black might be slightly worse here, but to me at least it feels like a playable or at least holdable position. In the game though, I felt worse very quickly, like b6 takes knight d5. I took here, which is a bad decision. I should have just played queen d8 with the same plan of trading on f3 and going bishop g5, and then I think it's not that bad for black. But I took here kind of erroneously thinking, because then I take on f3 as well. And my feeling was that this position I thought would be kind of reasonable for black, just based on other positions I've seen with opposite color bishops where it feels like one side is worse. I mean, clearly white can only be better here with the better bishop, but how much better white is can, definitely be a consideration. And long story short, I shouldn't have went in for this position. I shouldn't have gone here. It was the first round, and I was basically like suffering trying to hold this and it was not fun. It was not that easy, and it didn't really last very long. So basically, I should have just avoided this, like rook b8 here, for example. And if white takes on d4, then I can take with the c pawn. This is a better version because I'll get some counterplay on the c file. Or if c3, I can draw back to e6 and then at least keep more pieces on the board. And black is, again, tiny bit worse here, but I think this is, again, a much better version than what happens in the game. Because in the game, white just kind of gets a free hand. Queen takes f3, and he starts kind of building up, g3, h4. The computer thinks he could have already pushed with like h5, king g2, and it's already giving white a pretty serious edge there. But he goes for a5 and a6, pushing on this side of the board, which totally fine as well. Now white has this idea of like bishop to b7 and rook a5, and just putting a little bit of pressure on the queen side. And yeah, just an unpleasant situation here. The game continues, queen e3. I drop back bishop d8, rook f1, b4. I really should have played rook b6 at some point because this would kind of negate this bishop b7 idea and then would allow me to play b4 and keep everything reasonably solid. Like, I think black is still holding here with best play, but yeah, whether we can continue to hold it is not so clear. So bishop d8, and eventually I push b4, bishop b7, bishop b6, but now white starts pushing on the king side, and the position is honestly not like that bad for black if black finds like the right way to deal with this, but I definitely did not. But apparently I could have taken on c3, thrown this in, which I definitely considered, but I thought white's pushing d4. In this position, I didn't think was very fun for black. It looked like white is just going to have a big center. But it turns out after this move f5, maybe black is actually having some reasonable counterplay. Because the bishop on b6 here at least has a target if e5 were taking, and then the d4 pawn is gonna hang. And yeah, apparently this is a pretty unclear situation. So I totally misevaluated that during the game, where I definitely didn't see this f5 idea. And instead I end up going for queen to g4, just trying to, like, I don't know, create some tension on the king side. But white plays rook f3, could have played f5 as well. There was nothing really wrong with this either. But rook f3 just building up. I take on c3, take on f4, queen drops back, rook f1. And now I just needed to play f6. I just needed to realize what was about to happen. Just put the pawn on f6. And it's not so easy for white to break through here. In fact, like, black is worse, but white will still have to open things up, and black would have to make a mistake, I think, to lose the game from here. Instead, I played rook e8, and that was basically all white needed. Queen f2. Again, f6 I had to play, but I think it's already kind of too late here. Rook e7, and bishop d5 comes in. I went here, takes on f7, take on c3, bishop drops back. But now the f-file is opening up, and my king is too weak, and the bishop on b6 is, of course, just a passive tourist of a piece. And so white's position is just completely winning now. Game had a nice finish. Takes, king h7, bishop g8 check. And that was GG. If I take the bishop, then it's queen f8, and white will pick up the rook. And it's game over. And if I move anywhere else, then it's queen h6, for example, and rook f8 mate. So yeah, a tough first game. Definitely, I just misplayed it, like right out of the opening, just going for too many exchanges and thinking I could hold this position, where in fact, maybe I could have if I played better, but I think the bigger mistake was just going into this situation in the first place. And definitely it was just too passive of a position to be in out of the opening. So round one, unfortunately, starts off with a loss. Going into round two, I played another local grandmaster, Dambasuren Batsuren, also goes to St. Louis University. Also a player I played, I think actually just once in classical, where he beat me with black. But okay, this game I had white, hoping for a good result. I started with e4, and yeah, look, I'm not an e4 player, but I decided to just play e4 in a couple games in this tournament, mainly to build up some experience, and also because I find it pretty fun to play e4. I find it kind of adventurous, like living on the wild side, going for all these sharp openings where I don't have a ton of experience, but I guess the idea is that I'm trying to build experience for the future. So I go for e4, knight f3, knight c6. I play the Ruy Lopez. I wasn't exactly sure what was going to happen in this game because I saw my opponent was bouncing around a lot, and he ends up going for a6 and d6, so-called deferred Steinitz system. And I didn't have anything special prepared here. I know generally white plays like c3, d4, and goes for like a typical Ruy Lopez setup. But I went for this interesting idea to castle and then play c4, where white looks to then play d4, and in many cases we get a King's Indian kind of structure. So I decided to play this because at least I have some experience in King's Indian positions, and I felt like it could help me in this position. I could kind of take the game into somewhat known territory. So g6, d4, bishop g7, d5, knight to d4, and here I took on d7, I played bishop to e3, but probably should have taken on d4. I think this would have been the critical choice, then followed up by something like rook to e1. And I think white is better here in this structure, like knight d2, knight to f3. I can force black to play c5. And what I think neither me nor my opponent really anticipated is that, let's say, white can play a kind of position like this with ideas of like rook to b1 and b4, and yeah, maybe actually can stand a little bit better here. Like black will still have to figure out how to deal with white's space advantage. Knight on e7 is not so good, and so on and so forth. So maybe I could have fought for a little bit of a bigger advantage in this opening. Also, taking on c6 is a possibility, followed by taking on e5 and queen c2. There were some games like this where white could try like rook d1, knight c3, knight d5, and so on. But what ends up happening is d5, knight d4, we trade, we go bishop e3, black takes on f3 and pushes f5. And this is kind of interesting idea, and I thought this was quite accurate during the game, because otherwise it'll take black time to get this in, and white will get this nice setup of queen e2 and f3. So if black were to play like knight f6 and castle, white goes back queen e2, then I can play f3 next move and kind of get this nice setup. Black is missing the light squared bishop, and yeah, we were thinking this is a decent version for white. Knight d2 might even be an improvement as well, to eventually bring the knight to c4 after a future c5 push. So f5 I thought was a pretty accurate move. I go queen e2 right away. And if black takes, I'm just going to go knight c3 and eventually win back this pawn and play against this bishop on g7. So knight f6 play, knight c3. Here black could go f4 and play this position, but yeah, I was thinking that white would have a reasonable approach here. We could go knight d1, knight f2 and cover the g4 square, play h3 as well, eventually play c5. Engine actually thinks black is totally fine, which is somewhat defying the conventional logic that white is supposed to be better if you trade off the light square bishops. But yeah, I think actually I kind of misjudged this position, and I think black could have had this. But in any case, we get knight takes e4, trades on e4. I went bishop d2 to kind of just win the pawn back right away. Actually could have also just played around the pawn, interestingly enough, something like b4 and a4. Like the c pawn is not really going anywhere. Black can't really do anything with it. It's hard for black to do anything on the king side, whereas white can happily push on the queen side, look for some pressure, some breakthrough, and one day we'll pick up the pawn when it's more comfortable for us. So this actually is kind of an interesting idea that Stockfish was pointing out. Instead, I went bishop d2, castles, and here my opponent offered me a draw, which I ended up accepting, as at this point I didn't really feel like I had much of a chance for an advantage here as white. I think maybe nominally white is a tiny bit better because I think the bishop is a slightly better piece, but objectively I feel like black is very much equal here with ideas like queen f5, just challenging the e4 square, b6, a5, kind of just holding everything steady. And yeah, in the long run, I didn't feel like I had a ton of winning chances here, and we are playing 2 rounds per day. I'm already tired. You know, I lost the first game. It's like spoiled my mood. And yeah, I feel like, okay, let's keep it solid and just get on the board. So round 2 ends in a draw. That takes us to round 3, where again, I was black, and this time I was playing against Grandmaster Kirk Ghazharian, who actually, I don't know if he's a GM yet, but he just recently got the title. He's a pretty young player, really, really strong player. So I knew this game was going to be difficult. But anyways, it starts with e4, c5. We get another Ross Limo Sicilian. I played knight f6. Here, if knight c3, we transpose to the same opening as in the first game. Instead, Kirk goes for bishop takes c6 and plays d3. So we get another very, very classic structure. I played queen c7 here, a4, e5. And this one has been super trendy in this last year. A lot of games in these positions. Personally, I find them quite interesting and very, very double-edged. But yeah, they're sharp. They're not easy to understand. So a4, I went e5, b3. I wasn't 100% sure here what to do in the opening. I was just kind of relying on my general setup here to play bishop e7, bishop e6, knight d7, f6. This is kind of like the typical approach that black tries to play. In the long run, the knight tries to go to e6 and eventually d4. This is like the classic Rossolimo plan. So I go bishop e7 here, knight d2, bishop to e6. And I realized during the game this transposed to a game from the candidates between Praggnanandhaa and Caruana, which was a very, very important game. But at least I had that bit of knowledge where I knew, okay, the position had to be fine for black. So knight c4, knight d7. In that game, I believe, continued knight g5, knight f8, and was a big battle. Caruana ended up winning. Very, very critical game. But here, white goes bishop to b2. So Kirk deviates from that line. I played f6, typical idea to restrict white's pieces, and knight e3. So yeah, thematic position in the Rossolimo, and unfortunately I ended up misplaying this one rather quickly again, showing my inexperience in these middle game structures. So I castled a5, knight f8, knight d2. I'll just show you guys how the game went. King b8, knight f5. I went g6, knight takes d7, queen e7, g3. And so here white is like already better because I've given up my bishop pair. I have a weakness with these double pawns that white doesn't really have on their side. And white just has the better bishop with f4 coming and this whole diagonal kind of lining up. So this was a problem for me. I mean, it was somewhat better to take on f5 and play this position. But here black is also already a little bit worse. Instead, none of this was necessary. I should have just played g6 at some point here before knight f5. And then I think black is totally fine. The engine thinks black is slightly better, which, okay, you know, we can call it equal. But yeah, clearly I just needed to play this move, g6, and then stop the knight from coming to f5. And then from here, black can continue to push on the king side, continue improving our pieces. But the point is, white isn't really having such a clear plan on how they're going to continue to play the position. So that was my bad. And here I end up worse. I tried to defend. And honestly, this game was a very, very long struggle. But basically, I just felt worse throughout this whole middle game with the opposite color bishops. Similar to the first round, where I ended up on the worst side of a middle game with opposite color bishops. But here, okay, I kept fighting cd4. I mean, I missed chances like the engine said that e takes d4 would have been a better approach, f4, f5, and then play this structure where, yeah, maybe it's actually harder for white to open up the bishop and we're blockading on the light squares. That's kind of interesting, definitely not apparent to me. You know, I played cd4, fixing the structure, f4, f5, and we get this situation. Yeah, I just felt like white is better here because the position is opening up, and long term, it did feel like his bishop is stronger than mine because mine's kind of a dud on the king side. White at least has this target on d4. He has this plan to put the bishop on f4. So it felt still like I'm the one that has to equalize here. But okay, I think I had my chances. So c5, rook e1, rook e8. We trade b4. Engine was saying king b1 here was the only move to give white the advantage, with the idea to reroute the bishop to c1, which I thought was nice. But b4 also very, very reasonable, trying to open things up and open up the diagonal for the bishop. But b6, and it seems like black is holding here. Queen f2, rook e3. King b1 was played. Here I went queen e5, rook f8. And yeah, I only just noticed this moment when I was analyzing, but okay, in the game I was deciding between two moves here. Rook e1 check and queen takes g3. And queen g3 I was a bit nervous about because takes, b takes c5, for example. And yeah, I was very concerned about my queen side, about my king. White's bishop can come in, and I was worried that if I lose both of these pawns, my g-pawn won't be enough counterplay because white will have two passed pawns, really active pieces, and so on. So this one I think was playable for black, and I ended up going for rook e1 check and queen e3, which also very playable, leads to this endgame where black should be holding with best play. But what I should have done upon further analysis was this move rook f3, which I didn't think about during the game, but afterwards I realized is very, very strong because it's forcing the rooks off. And without the rooks, it's very hard for white to actually do anything in this position. And concretely, after takes, if white ever takes this pawn on f3, I'm going to have queen e1 check, and then picking up something on the queen side or giving perpetual checks. Basically, black is holding here. If white doesn't take the pawn, then queen e2 is coming. And so, yeah, white has to take on f3 one way or the other. Let's say take, queen f3. I give check here, and then it's either queen b4 check or queen a5 check next. And yeah, white just can't escape the immediate perpetual, and black is making a draw. So this is actually a very clean way to hold, and very concrete too, but somehow I missed it. I just didn't fully consider this move, I think, because it's not too hard to calculate, but once you see it, it's very apparent that it's just immediately holding for black. So anyways, I go for check and queen e3, but now queen f4 check. If I don't trade, king b7 runs into a6, which would be a big problem. So I have to trade. Rook takes f4, rook to g1. And here, this rook g1 was a big mistake because now it allows white to take on c5, and long term he's hitting all these weaknesses. So I should have just taken on b4 and just played this position. And it's a little bit tricky because white takes here, but then I'll take this pawn, and at least black has counterplay. With the queenside pawns, the g pawn is still a target. Okay, white will get the bishop to f4, but also possible to... No, I think this move is fine, but then we have ideas like b3, and the bishop can come out, and yeah. So this would have been okay for black. I played rook g1, now takes rook f7, and it's a problem because I can't take on g3 due to bishop f4 check, and it's not so easy to get the king out. So I tried to defend here, bishop e6. This was the last chance. I needed to find the move king to c8, and then apparently this is equal because I'm finally able to take on g3. So after c5, for example, I take, and if bishop here, I'm in time with rook c3, and white cannot checkmate me with c6, rook h8, which I was nervous about during the game. But here black is just in time, and so concretely there's nothing dangerous there. Instead, I took on c4, but now king to b2, and now I'm not taking on g3. White gets this amazing square for the bishop on f4, and this position is just very unpleasant for black, and I think objectively black is essentially close to losing, or in practice, it's just we're not holding it because we have too many weaknesses, especially the d pawn and the h pawn. White's weaknesses are easy to defend, and yeah, I'm just not able here, to get d3 in because rook c7 hits the bishop. I have to play here, then king b3. And yeah, I tried to hold this, but I didn't have a lot of time. Also, immediately here, white is just picking up the d pawn after rook to d8. So this is already one pawn. And yeah, I'm just playing on the increment here. I tried to defend the best I could, but Kirk's technique, I think, was just very, very solid. Just slowly improving the position, maneuvering around with the rook and the bishop and the king, but not letting me really do anything, just keeping everything defended. And I'm trying to put pressure on g3, on c4, and a5, but white just keeps everything defended. And yeah, eventually he's able to go after the h-pawn. Bishop to e5. Now I can't defend this guy, and soon it was all over. So bishop e5, rook g1. Finally he takes. Now it's two pawns here. Again, check. Rook comes in. Everything is defended, and yeah, the game lasted a couple more moves, but eventually I did have to resign. I chose after this moment rook to e5 because now white can push the c pawn forward. My rook can never take on g3 because the h-pawn moves forward, and yeah, it's just a losing position, 2 pawns down. So tough endgame. I mean, I definitely felt better about this game than I did about my round 1 game because that one was very one-sided. This one, at least, I felt like I put up a much better fight, but yeah, ultimately it would have been nice to hold this one because I felt like, yeah, my position was definitely not that bad out of the opening. So going into round 4, I only had half a point out of 3, so kind of a rough start. But it was a very tough tournament, and there were a lot of players, a lot of very strong players, also on not very many points. So I was kind of in decent company. In this game, I was paired against Justus Williams, who is a fellow international master and quite a strong player. And once again, I go for e4. I didn't know what opening to expect, but I decided, let's experiment. Let's let's get some more experience. So e4, c5, we get an open Sicilian with e6. And Justus goes for a6, the con Sicilian. So this was one of the openings I prepared before the game, so I had some idea of what I wanted to do here. I went for c4, knight f6, knight c3, queen c7, and a3. The idea of this move is to stop bishop to b4. And we end up getting this interesting hedgehog type of position. Bishop b7, f3, black goes d6, rook to c1, bishop e7, bishop e2. And yeah, from what I could tell before the game, I felt like these positions were quite sharp, and that white had a lot of potential to play on the king side with like g4 and h4. And that's what I ended up doing, castles g4. And I don't remember if this was exactly like the exact position I prepped, or if I had just seen ideas to push g4 in very, very similar positions. Maybe it wasn't the exact moment for it, but I felt like it was correct. Here black goes knight d7. It's a bit tricky for black to develop because of knight bd7, then g5, and where does this knight go? And if black goes knight c6, they always have to watch out for knight d5. Typical idea in the open Sicilian. Takes, and then white is going to win the piece back on c6. So knight fd7, very typical maneuver. And funny thing is, I only discovered this after the game. My opponent had this position as white 2 months ago in October in another classical tournament against strong grandmaster. So I had no idea he actually had this position as white, which may have been messing with him during the game. In that game, he actually played a very interesting move, king to d2, which I was considering in this exact position, because when you prepare this position with the engine, there are many moments where it suggests king d2, which is an insane move, but you trust the engine. And the point is that the king is going to c2 and b1. In a lot of positions, black is not really in time to do anything about it. And then when the king is on b1, then the king is super safe, and white has a free hand to attack on the king side. So you just get this like fantastic version of things. Another way of doing it is to play queen d2 and then king d1, king c2, king b1, like this, castle by hand. I don't think this is a good moment to do it. I think knight c6, concretely, black is getting a lot of counterplay here, but it's just funny that, yeah, he ended up playing this move. This is the exact move I was thinking about during the game. But then I changed my mind. I ended up going g5, and I decided to park my king on f2, which I felt like was another option. I think h4 is actually the computer move. For whatever reason, it's more accurate to start with this one before g5. But anyways, I played here, rook c8, h4, queen d8, king f2, and we get a very kind of weird position where white has really taken a lot of space. And in the past, I would never like play this way because I feel like white is just overextending. And now I go b4, and so we're just playing on both sides of the board, king's on f2. But yeah, when you analyze similar positions these days with the engine, it often tells you that white can totally hold on to the space, and a lot of times this is worth doing. So I do think white is actually a little bit better here, and the game felt nice for me. So b5 played, takes. I don't want to take on b5 and allow black to take and go rook a3. I thought black is having a lot of counterplay in a situation like this. So I go for queen to b3, rook to b8 played, defending the b pawn, and now f4. I thought an important move to stop knight e5, and this allows me to eventually prepare stuff like either bishop d3 or bishop f3, and rook to g1 as well. h5 I want to play so that the g pawn is defended. That's really the main plan, h5 and g6. So now Justus goes for knight b6. So he's offering up the b pawn, and if I don't take this pawn, then knight c4 is going to enter the position, and then I'll probably have to take the pawn anyway, but give up my light square bishop in the meantime. So I didn't really see the issue after bishop takes b5. It's not the most comfortable pawn to take, but I did feel like black doesn't really have enough. So like takes, for example, and well, I have two pawns on the queen side. If black doesn't create enough counterplay, the two protected passers are just going to win white the game. And there is no obvious follow-up for black here. It seems like white is holding solid. So I took on b5, black goes bishop a8, and now I realize, okay, he wants to play d5 and open up the center, so I go rook d1, d5 happens anyway, I played e5, and it's a very scary position because if black is able to break with d4 and I miss this resource, my king on f2 could end up completely exposed, and black has plenty of pieces to one day checkmate me. So here black goes queen f8, and yeah, probably it's not the best move. I think, well, actually, I think this was reasonable, but the idea was to play f6, which ends up being quite bad for black. But after knight e2, which I quite like, by the way, bringing the knight to d4, black could still go knight c4 here and sack the second pawn, but I think this was the best that black could get. Like bishop d5, I take on c8, rook c8, queen d3, and yeah, I think white has the advantage. We have 2 extra pawns now, but bishop on d5 is very strong. My king is open. This is not like the easiest position to convert for white, not even close. Any pawn I push, hangs the other one, so this would be tough. I think this would be quite tough. But instead we get f6, and I wasn't totally happy to see this because now my king is opening up, but I started calculating and I realized that I have ways of dealing with black's counterplay. So I take with the e pawn, gf6, and I play knight d4. And I quite like the concept I came up with. My idea was that if black were to push e5, either here or let's say in the game after f takes g5 and then e5, my idea was to play knight f3 and basically just blockade black's entire attack. So e takes f4, for example, bishop d4. And this was kind of the dream position I had in mind, where I've given back my extra pawn. I don't care about that anymore. What I want now is to just shut down black's pieces. And so the d5 pawn is shutting down the knight and bishop. The queen here is shut down. Whereas my pieces are actually quite good. Bishop on d4 is brilliant. The other bishop's coming to d3. Rook is coming to h1. And it's white that is just about to checkmate black's king. So I was quite happy to kind of get this concept in mind. And now, yeah, I felt very, very confident here about this position. Bishop takes g5, runs into knight takes c6. And so, yeah, black is just not getting enough play here. So bishop d6 played, rook c8, knight f3, hitting the knight on b6. And now it's kind of tough for black because bishop takes f4 is hard to get in. I want to go bishop d4 anyway. But right now I'm hitting the knight. The knight doesn't have a clear square because knight c4. I can take this one, and maybe that was the best chance anyway. Knight c4 takes, and rook takes c4. But I think, yeah, I think in general white is doing well here. I'm not exactly sure what move to play, but actually, okay, this would still be tricky though. White is up a pawn, and yeah, I would have to figure out some move to play. The rook d4, rook c1. But what we get in the game is bishop takes f4, and this sacrifices a piece. Bishop takes b6, queen to f5. But I didn't really feel like this should be enough, although it is scary because black wants queen h3, queen g4, and so on. I end up going with this move, bishop to e3, which ends up being good enough, but actually gives black a chance. Because, well, in the game, black played rook c2 check, bishop e2. And here, white is actually doing fine because knight d4 is coming and all my pieces are kind of near the king. But what black could have done was play d4, which I totally didn't realize, but just opening up the bishop. And if I take on f4, which looks like the refutation, because queen takes f4, queen takes d6 check, game over. Well, here after bishop takes f4, black can throw in bishop d5, which I think we both missed. And now queen takes f4 is coming, and black actually has a ton of counterplay for the piece. So like queen d3 takes on f4, and then rook f8 is next, e5, and black could win the piece back soon. And there's going to be a lot of counterplay after rook f8, and yeah, a lot of checks. So actually, like, the game completely could have turned around, which was quite surprising. I mean, okay, this was a computer thing. I don't know how close either of us was to finding this. But yeah, so bishop e3 could have spoiled the whole game. Instead, I had other moves, like bishop c5 was better just to block the rook. Knight d4 was another move I was thinking about that's possible here, just hitting the queen. And then queen g4, queen f3, for example, and check king f1. I think white is winning here, but still tough. Like, even though we have the extra piece, it's some work to convert it. But anyways, after bishop e3, rook c2 check. I mean, very natural move played, bishop e2. But now d4 doesn't work. I think here we can go either bishop takes f4. I'm not sure, that might be okay, but knight takes d4 now hits the queen and the rook, so it's completely different for than the other line. Although I think knight d4 here, there would be take on e3. And queen takes g5, and yeah, who knows? Who knows what's going on here? Although I think it feels like actually if black, well, no, I actually think black has at least a draw with queen g6 check, and not clear how white can win this. I don't think we're getting out here anyway. So anyway, position still complicated, but d4, maybe just rook d4, and yeah, I think we're holding on to everything here. So this rook c2, this was basically the losing move. Bishop e2. Black tried bishop g3 check. I took. Rook takes e2. But now just knight d4 ends the game because I'm hitting the queen and the rook. Black has only one good check, queen e5, but then there's bishop f4. And again, there's a double attack. And so black is already down a piece, losing at least an exchange here. And so it's going to be down a rook. And now it's just game over. So after knight d4, black resigned. So yeah, I was happy to get this win. I mean, it's very rare for me to get wins with 1e4, you know, the Sicilian. It's not really my style, but I'll take it. And yeah, especially against a strong opponent, felt like, all right, I'm in the tournament now. Now I felt like I can start to pick things up. Definitely very, very important to get your first win in a tournament if you're not feeling super confident like I was. So that was good fortune. Moving on to round 5, I was playing black against Josiah Stearman. Another player I've played multiple times in the last couple of years. He was going to Mizzou University, which is not quite in St. Louis, but St. Louis adjacent. But yeah, he's a player I faced multiple times in recent years. And in this game, we go for the King's Indian, and he plays this move, bishop to d3. And this move is a little bit tricky. It's been trending the last couple of years or so with some ideas that I don't truly understand because after black plays bishop to g4, white often goes bishop e2, just backs up and just loses a tempo. And this is weird because if white plays bishop e2 here, there are players that will just play bishop g4 in this position, like as just like a normal move. It's not like considered the best line, but it is a line that is playable. So I've never fully gotten this one, bishop d3 and bishop e2. White just gives a tempo to reach this position. But anyways, I didn't play a good move here, knight to c6. My idea was to play e5, and if d5, then I was going to take on f3 and play this position with knight e5, which I thought is playable with c6, but rook c8 turns out is not so easy. It turns out white is actually better here, according to the engine, and can play this position, back it up with bishop e2 and f4, where white's two bishops and space advantage should give them an edge. White can also take on f3 with the pawn, which I definitely did not think about, but yeah, these days Stockfish really likes this position for white after h4. Let's say h5, bishop e3, for example, c6, rook to g1, and it's not the easiest position for white to play, but okay, I'll take the engine's word for it that white is better. So I kind of confidently play this move knight c6, and after some thought, my opponent goes bishop e3 instead of the critical d5. I thought d5 is nothing special or a playable position, but bishop e3 gets played. But now I get e5 in, and now this is just a really nice version of things for black. So d5, take on f3, bishop takes f3, knight to d4. And yeah, typical situation where we've given up the light squared bishop, but black's remaining pieces are nicely coordinated. White cannot take twice on d4 because of the typical trick, knight takes e4, hitting the queen, and then queen e4, rook e8. So this is important since white is uncastled. And if white plays something like knight e2, like trying to win back the pawn, usually black can just go rook e8 and get enough counterplay this way. And then knight d7, knight c5 stuff. And yeah, black is happy to get this play on the dark squares. So here I was already feeling very comfortable. White goes h4, h5, bishop to g5, queen d7. My moves are very simple, just unpinning, looking for knight h7. And here white takes and goes g4. And I knew this was definitely like not great for white because I remember having a game like this from white's point of view, and I remember just being worse and losing in a very similar fashion where, you know, after takes, the h pawn just ends up being a huge target. So that's what I did. Takes, queen e7, h5, and I played bishop to g5 here. And yeah, I think black is already just like at least slightly better, maybe even clearly better. The point is if white ever takes here, then we're the ones that are getting all the play on the dark squares, like king g7, rook h8, rook f8, bishop h4, and this is a target for white. Maybe I could have improved on the game instead of bishop g5 with bishop h4 with ideas of playing f5 and looking to open up the f file. I really didn't estimate this move properly, but this could have been pretty annoying for white. Anyways, I go bishop g5, knight e2, queen f6, just defending the knight on d4. So now if knight takes d4, e takes d4, I think this is just a nice version for black with the opposite color bishops. where I think black's bishop is stronger, and we're getting a lot of play on the dark squares with queen f4, f5, rook e8, and so on. But yeah, instead white went queen d3, and here white offered me a draw. I was like, all right, okay. I mean, yeah, normally, again, I don't think I would be taking a draw here. I felt like black is the one that is better. I didn't think I have a huge advantage, and yeah, the engine doesn't think black is actually that much better here. It's like 0.2 for black, so it's very, very small. I did think practically it's an easier position for black to play, but again, with the 2 rounds per day, I guess this is my protest against the schedule. I was like, all right, I don't think I'm that much better here. If this was like the last round, I have to win to play for like a norm or a prize or something, then okay, for sure I would play on. But otherwise, yeah, let's make a draw and save energy. So I took the draw. Probably not the correct choice, to be honest with y'all. I think in general, it's better to just fight on, even if you don't win the game. Just the experience of playing it out is probably good for your chess in the long run. So, yeah, one goal I'll set for myself actually in 2025 is to just play more of these positions out. If I think I'm at all better, then I should just keep playing and not accept a draw. I also had this issue in my last tournament, actually in Italy, and I ended up tying for first in the tournament, but there were a couple of games where I acquiesced to a draw and maybe could have played for more, and that could have been the difference. So something to think about, but okay, at the same time, 2 rounds per day, my confidence, again, wasn't so great at this moment in the tournament, and yeah, wasn't having like that great of an event. So yeah, decided to just put more points on the board. Anyway, going on to round 6, I again had white, and this time I was playing Varun Krishnan, who is a fellow IM. And once again, I started with e4, having fun with this, knight f3, and here black goes knight c6. So I was like, all right, I'll play the Roslima. Everyone's playing this against me. I'm suffering every game of the Roslima. Let me play the Roslima. Let me play the Roslima. And this is the same reason why I learned the King's Indian, because I was suffering against the King's Indian. I was like, all right, let me learn it, and either it's the perfect opening or I'll learn how to play against it. So bishop b5, my opponent goes e6, castles knight e7, rook e1. I go for like the classic rook e1, bishop f1, tucking the bishop away. d5 takes. I didn't really know a lot of theory here. I'm just trying to make principal moves. I kind of knew like this is the main idea, d4, c4, and so on. Knight f6. So yeah, at this point I'm out of book. Black is starting to take the pawn on d4. I'm already trying to figure out what to do. If I take on c5, I thought this endgame was really nothing special for me. Bishop takes c5. I have to deal with knight g4 ideas, e5, e4 ideas. I thought this is not great for white. So I go bishop to e3, bishop to e7, and now I played h3. h3 is not a right move though. I was worried about knight to g4, but I should have just played c4 anyway. And if black plays knight to g4, it turns out white can play d5. So this is an opening detail that I didn't know, but would have been nice to know. And this turns out to be good for white. Black can take the bishop, but we go fe3, c takes d5, knight a5, e4, for example. And we want to play knight c3, we want to play e5. And yeah, I think white is actually better in this position. So that's kind of why c4 is the main move. Now we know. Instead I went h3, which loses time. Knight d5, I have to go back, bishop c1, castles. Already I think white is not really fighting for the advantage here, but okay, I kept trying. c4, knight f6, bishop e3. Now black plays queen b6, and this is like a very sharp move because he's hitting b2 and he wants to go rook d8 and go after the d pawn. And I did a little bit of calculation here, but quickly I realized like I have to play knight c3. Queen takes b2 I definitely wasn't concerned about, because after knight a4, the queen is just not getting out. Like queen b4, for example, bishop d2, queen a3, rook e3, and black's queen is trapped. So yeah, knight c3, most natural move developing, rook to d8. Now I took on c5. And yeah, a lot of possible endgames here. For rook d1, I take on b6. I think this looks good for white because I snagged the pawn. If queen takes b2, I was going to play queen b3. And we both thought white would be a little bit better here, but it turns out after knight b4, black is actually fine in this endgame. Bishop d7, bishop c6 coming. But instead, black goes for bishop takes c5. And now I go knight a4. And again, the tactics are kind of working out for white, which I was happy about. For rook d1, knight takes b6. And if he takes one of my rooks, I'll take back. If he takes the bishop, I take the rook on a8, and the white is going to be up in exchange in the end because the knight comes out either via c7 or via b6. So after knight a4, he can't go for rook takes d1. He has to play a different move. He goes queen c7. Now I finally have to move my queen, so queen c1 takes, and we end up getting this middle game where, yeah, I feel like white is actually maybe a little bit better here because I have the simple plan of pushing the queen side majority. So I start with a3, b4, and I get queen e5. If queen takes e5, knight e5, I thought white would be better here. Instead, black goes queen a7. So now e5, c5, knight b6, bishop b7. And yeah, I definitely thought white is better here because my knight's on b6 and black's queen is on a7. But somehow it wasn't so easy to like figure out how to proceed because black has some trumps of his own. He's got the knight on d5 coming, and ideas of like bishop takes f3, which I don't want to allow. So I thought for a while here, but I couldn't figure out what to do. Turns out the strongest move was a4, which I definitely thought about. And the point is that after bishop takes f3, white goes a takes b5. So this could have been the game. And yeah, now if black pulls back, for example, then b takes a6, bishop a8. White has 3 pawns and looks like is close to winning. I mean, technically it's 2 pawns for the piece, but we have 3 pawns on the queen side. So it's 3 passed pawns. Engine thinks white is winning. I mean, to me, it still looks like super, super complicated. But yeah, you can understand how like b5 and eventually white's pawns might just decide the game. So this was definitely what I should have gone for. Instead, I played knight to g5, looking for sacrifices. Knight f7, knight takes e6. But black can defend knight d5. And if I take on f7, for example, and take here, I don't really have enough. There's no good follow-up. So I spent more time here. I ended up playing a4 in this position. Turns out rook a d1 was the best move, threatening to take on f7 and then take here, which I didn't fully figure out that this is good for white with this key move rook e5 at the end. So this was kind of the point where I'm threatening to take a lot of times on d5. So 3 times to be, actually 4 times to be exact, the knight, the rooks, and then the queen. And then eventually, for example, bishop a8, we end up in this position where white would have 2 pawns for the exchange, but black's king would be quite weak, and we have a really strong c pawn. So I think white has a big advantage here. So that was probably the thing to do, although of course the game would be very complicated, but rook d1, if black takes on b6, then we take on f7. This is kind of the idea. The king takes queen e6 check, queen e7 check, and then we're taking here. And so, yeah. And then eventually, I mean, I guess I should show that. All right, I'm sure white is winning a million ways, but yeah, this is a nice finish. So, yeah, that would have been the best try. I went a4 because it looked smart. Knight takes b6 played, and now knight takes f7. So what I calculated was after king takes f7, queen e6, king f8, cb here. This position I thought like should be quite promising for white because I'm getting a number of pawns for the piece. I'm probably going to get the a pawn as well. I wasn't 100% sure I'm winning here, but yeah, I felt like there should be good chances. Bishop c4 ideas as well. But after knight takes f7, black goes knight bd7, and unfortunately he kind of has this easy way out here. So there's some tactics. I go queen takes e6, but now bishop to d5, and he's just in time to deal with the threat of, because I was threatening smother mate with knight h6 check, queen g8, knight f7, but bishop d5 now covers it. So knight h6, king h8. Of course I can't play this because f7 is protected, but I can go back knight f7 check. He's forced to go here, knight h6, and we actually have a draw by perpetual, which is essentially forced. If king f8, then queen e7 is made on the board, and so he has to go back, and then knight f7, and yeah, we agreed on a draw. So very, very interesting game. A lot of tactics here. I thought I played reasonably well, despite not knowing the opening, to get some chances. But yeah, it would have been nice if I had found some of these options, a4, a couple moves earlier, or rook d1, setting up these knight takes f7 sacrifices, but not easy. It was not easy to find these variations, but nevertheless, interesting game. And for me, if I get an interesting fight with e4, and I don't lose the game, I'm kind of happy with just that already. So round 7, I was paired against Ryo Chen, who is an international master, very, very talented junior. Once again, we get the Sicilian, knight c3, knight f6, and bishop b5, another Ross Limo. I looked at the previous game, so I decided to stick with queen c7 and continue to play this position. I didn't think it was so bad. Castles e5, rook e1, knight d4. And this is essentially the same as the game against Kevlishvili from the first round, except that here white plays d3 instead of h3. Doesn't make a huge difference. If bishop g4, there's knight to b5, and so there's nothing special there for black. And so it's just better to continue normally with bishop e7. So a4, castles, knight e2, bishop g4, f3, bishop e6. And yeah, this knight e2, this was where I was kind of out of book, or trying to figure out what to do. White enlists on a pretty typical plan to go knight f1, knight e3, and look for the control over the d5 square. So I decided to provoke this f3, jump back, bishop e6. And overall, I think I was actually doing quite okay here, like queen d8, knight d5, bishop g5, c3, g3. And yeah, critical moment here, I take on e3, I go knight b6. I thought this decision ends up okay for me because I give up the bishop here, but I am going to be trading off some more of white's pieces and loosening his grip on the e5 square. I've got knight e7 as well coming if I need it. And so yeah, I think black is slowly getting out because knight e7, I can take here, and I should be okay. So we get trades on b6, b4, queen d7, queen b3. King h8, just playing for a future f5, e5, and now white has the bishop here, but yeah, I can just immediately trade it off. White took with the pawn, and black is maybe under a bit of pressure here, but actually, ultimately, I felt like I should be okay. I took on b4, bishop takes b6, take on c3, queen c3, f5, and now I felt like I'm getting counterplay, and even though I'm a little bit passive, I have some weaknesses, I can also generate some play on the king side. So I thought I should be all right here. So rook ad1, take on e4, rook takes e4, rook f6. Now my idea is just to pile up on the f file, queen d3, queen f7, queen e4, queen h5, and now queen g4. Interesting move offering this endgame, which I ended up going for. I didn't really have huge ambitions in this game trying to win. So like going crazy, keeping the queens on. I thought, okay, endgame looks equal. Let's just play the endgame. So take takes, rook a8. And eventually I do want to give up the d pawn in order to snag off white's a pawn and trade off all the pawns and kind of make a draw that way. So g5 played, rook e6, rook d3, king g8. White takes on d6, I take on a5, and now he goes c5. So the opponent definitely tried very hard to win this game. He, of course, can make a draw easily with bishop takes a5 and just go for the rook endgame. But c5, he keeps the bishop against the knight, the main imbalance. And yeah, actually, it wasn't so easy because like I do have to make sure I don't lose the b pawn. Here I calculated knight b3. If rook takes b7, I have rook c8, and then I'm winning the c pawn. And then, of course, black should be totally fine. So that's my only fear here, if I lose the b pawn and then white is left with this passed c pawn. So king e3, he holds on to everything. If rook c8, he still has rook d5 as played in the game. King f5, h3, g6. But still, I felt like I'm perfectly solid enough here, like I should have enough to hold. We end up getting g4 check. I take, rook takes e5, king h4, just going active. King f4, looking to mate mate black somehow. And if king takes h3, there's rook e3. So nice little trick there. But I went rook f8, king takes, rook e7, king takes g4, rook takes b7. So we end up in this endgame, rook e8 check, king d5. And here I felt I should be totally safe because I can just take on c5, which I end up playing. Bishop takes c5, h5. And now black has two pawns against the bishop, active king. So I felt like, yeah, it should be a draw. Of course it's a draw because even without the pawns, it would be a draw. But rook and bishop against rook, not the easiest thing to hold. Actually, that's really unpleasant. And it takes forever because you're playing on the 30-second increment. So we would be sitting at the board for like another hour. And there's like a second round later that day. So yeah, definitely didn't want to have to hold rook and bishop against rook. So thankfully I had the two pawns. But this one was a little bit tricky. King f5, bishop e7. Now white goes rook f7 check, rook f1, and he wants to give this check and this check. And if white picks up one of these pawns, he's going to win the second pawn. And then, 50 move rule just resets and resets. And slowly but surely, you can lose this. So I wanted to make sure I don't lose. I play g5. And it looks risky, but I'm basically always in time here. If king f3, I can just give a check. And so white doesn't have any good mating nets. It looks scary, but I was pretty sure during the game I should be okay here. Anyways, we get a lot of maneuvers, some repetitions, and white was pushing very hard again to just try to trick me somehow, moving the bishop here, just looking for any kind of mating chance, but I just kept the rook active and just holding off white's king. So more checks, bishop d4, bishop e5, rook to b3. Now at this point, I think I needed to be careful not to allow king f5. So rook b3, king f5, I can go rook f3 check and force white's king somewhere away from my own. So bishop d6, rook b6. And yeah, white kept trying, but eventually I was able to hold it. So king f3, check, bishop e3, I have g4. King e4, check, I gave another check. Now if white continues to come up, then I'm just going to start marching forward here. I think king h3, h4, g3. Obviously white can still lose against the pawns. And then if he goes this way and takes, then we can just trade the rooks off. And that's of course a draw. So he goes back king e4, and we end up repeating here. And finally, draw was agreed. So yeah, long game, 78 moves. And unfortunately, I didn't really have like a lot of winning chances in this one, but I felt like pretty happy with my play because I felt like I defended well. And I don't think my opponent ever had any real winning chances. So it's nice to hold the game against a strong opponent with black, especially in the line like Ras Lima, where I've been kind of struggling so far. Okay, so going on to round 8, I played another very talented junior, Alice Lee, who unfortunately for her wasn't having a great event in this tournament. So I felt like, okay, maybe she's not in her best shape, and so I might have a chance in this game. Because at this point, she's already higher rated than me, definitely a stronger player. Yeah, there's only going to be so many more tournaments where I'm going to have a chance against these juniors. So I wanted to take my shots. In this game, I started with c4, e6, knight f3, d5, g3, playing a kind of Catalan setup. And actually, I got tricked out of the opening here because black takes on c4, goes knight d7, queen a4, a6, take b5, bishop b7, and now black is like totally fine because the bishop got to b7 and is already neutralizing the Catalan bishop. So what I did wrong was a move order thing. I shouldn't have played knight f3, g3. I should have done g3 first, like Ding did in the World Championship match, d5, bishop to g2. So this is a better move order, public service announcement. This is how you should play this position. And the point is that if black takes on c4 here, then after knight d7, queen takes a6, queen c2, we've saved on knight f3, the bishop is on g2, and black cannot play b5 so easily. Black has to spend time here, and so white can actually fight for the advantage. The way it happens in the game, white actually just ends up getting nothing, and if anything, black actually has a very comfortable position here. Knight f6, queen b6, and yeah, black has good space. I went b3. d3 I think is the normal move, but I went b3, bishop to b2, d3. And yeah, I really wasn't feeling too ambitious here. At this point, I was just trying to like make normal moves. I felt like I'm playing black, actually. I felt like I have less space. I'm the one that's trying to equalize. So knight d2, knight d5. I went queen d1, kind of playing hedgehog style. Queen f1 is next. Knight f6, queen f1, knight to g4. Threatening potential ideas of knight e3, which would be super annoying. So I played bishop f3 here. I don't think this was the right move. I should have just taken and gone h3, and I think this position is still relatively equal. But I went bishop f3, knight e5, bishop g2 back, silently offering a repetition. And at this point, I would have been, I think, perfectly happy with the draw, because I felt like white is actually worse. But of course, black plays on, knight c6. And now my position is a little bit worse. Knight d4 is coming. I don't really have any play on the queen side, and it's not clear what to do. So I played bishop e4. I think just trying to go for queen h3 and have some idea in the position. Bishop to g5, annoying move. targeting this diagonal, forcing me to play f4. And now she should have just played bishop to e7, and this would have been very unpleasant for white because black has c4 ideas, knight e3 is a possible thing, black still has the d4 square, so basically just provoking this weakness and dropping back. What happens in the game is black takes on c3 and then drops back, but this trade I think just helps white because now black doesn't have this knight that can jump in with to e3 and b4, and I don't think knight takes d5 was a threat, so now I think white is actually just totally fine. So I take on b5, I go king h1, queen g2, queen c7, queen h3. I didn't think I'm better here, but I thought I can poke around a bit. f5, bishop drops back, trades on a1, rook a8, I trade there, I go queen g2, bishop f8. And yeah, actually, it's a funny moment. Like, I had no idea what to do here. I thought, like, maybe I'm a little bit better because I have some pressure on the diagonal, and at least I could squeeze a bit. But objectively, I thought black should be okay. But yeah, I go king g1, queen b6, and king f1. Because I just didn't know what to do. So I was like, all right, let me just shuffle my king closer to the queen side. Maybe this will help somewhere, is what I thought. Black goes bishop b7, and now g4. Because I want to open up some lines. I want to take and give bishop d5 check, and maybe play against black's king a little bit. So here black goes b4 with a tempo. And normally I would respond to this move with knight c4, hitting the queen. But here black can take on c3, take on b6, and go c2. And I can't stop the pawn from promoting. And I'm going to be down a piece. All because I put the king on f1. So if the king was anywhere else, of course, I go queen f1. It doesn't really work for black. But here it turns out black can get b4 in. So I felt like a real genius at this point. As I go back bishop b2, queen c7. But now I take on f5. And here black should have taken on f5, or after bishop d5 check in e3. I think white is maybe a little bit better here, but it's not much. But at least I would try to press this. Kind of an interesting position where white has this nice squeeze. But what happens in the game is after gf5, Alice didn't have a ton of time, and she decides to go queen takes f4, which is a very logical move because black grabs the pawn, hits the knight, and hits the pawn on f5. So black can potentially get the pawn back here and pins the bishop, so I'm not in time, of course, to take on c6. But tactically, the move ends up failing, and I already realized I had this nice move king e1 in response. So this was a good one because now I'm defending the knight and I'm getting out of the pin, which means the knight on c6 is hanging. So it's kind of a weird double attack kind of thing because e6 is still hanging and this is hanging, and so black can't really defend everything. If queen d6 I take, black can't take because of bishop d5. So all of a sudden it's actually just losing for black because I'm taking on e6. Alice found, I think, the only defense, knight d4, because if I take on b7 there's knight c2 check and knight e3, and white loses the queen. So bishop takes d4, takes on f3, knight, queen f3, queen takes d4, f takes e6. So we've gotten some trades, but white has won a pawn. This pawn is not gonna be picked up by black because I have queen f7 check or queen e4, and I have good knight versus bad bishop. So I actually thought like, oh, this is probably just a winning position for white, but it wasn't so easy, especially with not having a ton of time on the clock. But anyways, queen f6, knight f3, bishop b7. So black here is just trying to blockade. Then she plays g5. And now black tries to get some counterplay with like g4. But ultimately it wasn't enough. So queen e4, h5, h3, covering the square, king g7, knight d2. And I'm just trying to bring the knight around. I think knight e3, knight f5 was my idea, or knight e3, knight d5. Now queen g6, I gave check, queen d5, queen b2. And things get very sharp because now black is hitting the knight and hitting the pawn. But thankfully I have queen d7, counterattacking the bishop here. King f8, check, king g7, queen e8. Very important move. So if black takes on d2, I take on e7 with check, and then I'll get a bunch of checks and eventually be able to cover this one and should be winning the queen and pawn endgame. So queen e8, black went back, queen f6, but now I take on h5, queen takes e6. And I've given up my e-pawn, but I've kept the extra pawn, and all of black's pawns remain on dark squares. I have all the light squares in the position, so I felt pretty strongly that this should just be a technical win, or at least in practice, that it's just very, very hard for black to defend. So knight c4, I complete the checkers approach. I get all my pieces on the light squares. And now it's just really tough because it's like knight e3 and the queen and knight are a tough combo. And I have all these ideas. I can go after the king, I can go after the pawns, and so on. So Alice tried bishop f4, e3, going after, just shutting down the bishop, bishop c7, queen d5. And now queen to g6, just kind of a last ditch try because black didn't want to defend passively. But I take on c5, queen takes d3 is the idea. Sacrificing the bishop, but looking for some perpetual checks. But I realized the checks do run out here. So king g3, queen e1 check, king f3. And yeah, I just have too many escape squares. So there's no way to keep the king boxed in. Queen h1 check was played, king f2, queen takes h3. Now queen c6, and yeah, I'm just a piece up. I repeated once. Give some more checks, queen to g3, black played queen d7. And okay, this was the final mistake, but at this point, I mean, the position, of course, is just a technical win. But this last thing allows queen h2 check. And now anywhere the king goes, it's going to be knight e5, picking up the queen. So king g6, knight e5, and that was game over. So yeah, not the cleanest game, considering the opening, but I felt like, okay, at least it was a good fight, and I found some nice ideas there in that middle game. So I felt like I played reasonably well after the opening. And yeah, obviously it's always good to take down a strong opponent because wins these days are few and hard to come by. All right, so going into the final round, I was playing black against another Grandmaster, this time Grandmaster Gergely Kantor, originally, I believe, from Hungary. And this game was a King's Indian, so no more Ross Limo, another King's Indian. And he goes for this trendy line with bishop e2 and bishop e3. So I go for knight a6. This is a system I've played before, h4, h5. There are other ways for black to play, and based on how this game went, I might explore them. Because knight f3 was played, I went knight g4, bishop g5, c6, castles, bishop d7, and now rook to c1. So this has all been seen before. In fact, I had a game here as black, which my opponent likely had seen and prepared against, where white played knight e1. And this was my game against another super strong junior, Andy Woodward, from the 2023 US Masters, so US Masters last year. And yeah, that game was very complicated, but I'll show you guys what happened because it's relevant. So knight e1, knight c7, f3, knight f6. This was my previous game in this line. So I went e5, d5, takes knight h7, hitting this guy, g3, b5. Playing on the queen side, a3, a5. And here, actually, I think black was doing quite well. I could have played f5 here and had the classic King's Indian counterplay. So that was okay for me, but just kind of like barely okay. And in this game, white goes rook c1, so not knight e1. I played rook e8 because I remember seeing a game with this move, rook e8, where this is also a useful move, like defending e7 and so on. But now my opponent ends up playing knight e1. He just goes for the same exact thing, knight c7, f3, bishop e3. But now when we get this position with e5, d5, my rook's not on f8, it's on e8. It's like just the worst version. So I can take on d5 and go knight h7, g3, and I can go b5 and a5 if I want, like in my previous game, but eventually I'll have to spend the move on rook f8 if I want to play f5. Not totally necessary, but when I play f5, takes f4, the h-pawn hangs, and so white has bishop takes h5 on tap, hitting the rook. So that's why this move is just really kind of harming me. So this rook e8 move, I think, was not smart. I think what I should have done here was make another one of black's improving moves. For example, knight to c7 is possible. I can start with knight f6. And then I think black would have been more or less okay. But yeah, I end up getting into a worse position because I go for this e5, d5. And here I didn't want to do the same thing with cd5 and b5. So I decided to play c5 just to kind of play it a little bit differently. But this is a dubious decision because, well, of course, white can play on the queen side, but white can also play on the king side. In fact, one move white could play here is g4, which I thought about during the game. I didn't really believe in it, but like apparently it's very strong. It's not a normal move white can play, like, not typical in the King's Indian, but here, like, it works out. With the king on g1, somehow white can get away with it. Where, yeah, I don't have any good responses, like, to create counterplay. If knight h7, I think white can just go knight to g2 and cover the h-pawn, and the point is that white is just kind of shutting down black's queenside play, or kingside play. Eventually can maybe go g5 and even f4. And yeah, long story short, black is just very, very passive here. Anyway, I don't know exactly how this works. You guys can take it up with the computer if you're interested. My opponent played more human white, queen d2. And now I played really bad move, king h7. It's probably one of my worst moves of the tournament. Because this allows bishop to g5, and all of a sudden I'm pinned up, f4 is coming, and I've taken away the h7 square from my knight. So normally I would just move my queen here and go knight h7 to deal with this. I can't do that here, and I'm just completely busted after bishop g5. So instead of king h7, it would have been better to pass, basically make any other move. Rook f8, for example, then bishop g5, queen e8, f4, knight g4, and I've got f6 ideas. I got my queen and rook out of the way. This would have been a better version. Here, white is still better, but at least it's very much a fighting game. After king h7, bishop g5, black was just lost. And unfortunately, I just kind of missed this move or underestimated it, forgot about it, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, I just didn't realize white can go back with the bishop to g5, play f4, and it's just it's game over, actually. Like f4 is coming, and then the pressure on the f file is way too annoying. And it's hard for me to move my knight because f7 is going to hang as well. So I played b5, just desperation, trying to open things up, looking for any chance I can. Takes queen to b8, so I unpin and I attack this guy, but now f4. And if takes, white can take with the queen, and I just can't keep everything defended. My position is collapsing. It's a terrible Benoni, basically. I went knight g4, takes on g4, bishop takes g4, takes on e5, bishop takes e5. And now what my idea was, all right, I'm going to give the f7 pawn, I'll play king g8, let's say white goes back, maybe I can take on b5, and look for the d4 square, and I'm down a pawn, but maybe I have some counterplay because I have the e5 square, but it's not enough. White can go knight d3, for example, and is winning. Bishop d4, bishop e3. White just has huge advantage here. But I really like how my opponent played it. I thought he actually converted this in a really instructive way. He just goes bishop f6. He doesn't take the pawn, he just goes bishop f6, immediately winning the dark squares because he hunts down my dark square bishop. And then after the trade of bishops, he's going to get the f4 square for his queen, and then d6 is falling, and yeah, my position just immediately collapses. So I tried king to g8. He takes on e5, rook e5, queen f4, queen e8, knight d3. And I saw this coming. If I move my rook back, then there's queen takes d6, and so that's just hopeless. So I try knight takes b5. This was just my one hope in the position. If knight takes b5, then rook takes e4. And I thought maybe I can complicate things because I can win back the piece. It's still probably bad, like queen f6, queen takes f7, but at least that was just the idea. Just try to complicate things, hope for the best. Instead, he took on e5, winning the exchange. And at first glance, it looks like maybe black has some nice counterplay here, but it's actually very illusory because I'm not really threatening anything with the knight, and white's king is safe, and his pieces are just way too active for me to have anything. So it's just a winning position for white. He goes d6, rook d8, knight d5. I take on d6, rook takes c5. And here I decided to resign because white just has too many threats. Knight f6 check, followed by taking on g4, knight e7 check, as well as just taking the e-pawn. And yeah, I have no moves. So but rook c7 is a simple move I can play. And yeah, it's just completely busted. Knight e6 is a fork, but white has knight f6 check to counter. So yeah, there's really no hope here for black. So I thought it was definitely an appropriate moment to resign. So very tough game to finish on because it's just a complete blowout. Like I just got a losing position very quickly, got a bad opening, made a couple mistakes, and immediately lost. Similar to the first game, in fact, which kind of put a damper on the tournament and gave a rough start. But yeah, overall, again, I finished with 4 out of 9 and ended up gaining points, because I made several draws against higher rated players. I won 2 games, ended up gaining a few points. So that was good. I've now had 2 good tournaments in a row, which is nice. After the last year or so, like my chess definitely hasn't been going well in general. Like I've been losing points in most tournaments. So I had a good tournament in Italy. Here I had another solid event. Definitely gives me more confidence for the future. You guys might have been able to tell I wasn't playing with a ton of confidence in this tournament, accepting draws, not feeling like I was in great form. But okay, result ended up being pretty reasonable. And now I'm excited for 2025. I definitely feel like I have a lot of work to do in terms of my chess. I don't have any tournaments planned yet, but I'll be doing some research over these next couple weeks and looking for some tournaments to play the next year. Because I definitely want to continue the pursuit of the GM title, try to improve my chess and all that good stuff. Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of improvement that could still be had. Like there's a lot of points in my game that could be better, especially you guys saw in terms of the opening, middle game play, end game play. Calculation actually was maybe not so bad. I don't feel like I had any, I don't think I had like horrible miscalculations throughout the event. I actually feel like I was calculating pretty well. So that's something I've been working on. So that's good. That's a positive. And yeah, result ended up being good as well. So I'll be planning my next year over the next couple of days, trying to figure out what I want to work on these next several months. Definitely, I'm looking forward to a big year, not just for my own chess, but for dojo as well. Like here at ChessDojo, we've been working hard, we've been grinding, we've been growing the program, really doing a lot. We just released our first book, How to Analyze Your Games, out now on Amazon. Link will be in the description, so check that out. And yeah, we have big plans for the dojo training program coming up for next year as well. So stay tuned for a video from Jesse. I think he's going to be outlining some dojo plans and talking about how you guys can structure your training for the new year. And yeah, I'll just invite you guys to already start thinking about how you're going to set yourself up for success in the new year. Because I'm going to think about it. I think you guys should think about it too. I'll be working on my own chess, but also making content for the channel to help folks improve on their end. So yeah, looking forward to a super fun and exciting new year. That'll do it, folks. Thanks for watching. As always, hope you enjoyed the video and found it instructive. And I think that'll be it. So if I don't see you, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year, and see you folks in 2025. Take care.